Okay, welcome to this edition of the Native News Update. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. Here are the news stories of the day from the Associated Press and other Native American news sources. 3 Crow tribal members and another man have been arrested in New Mexico on suspicion of securities fraud while seeking investments in purported mineral development on the Crow Reservation in southern Montana. Ted Hogan, Grady Huntsarrow, and Lauren Oldbear, along with Brad Greenberg of North Carolina, were arrested during late May at a hotel in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. Tila Kale of the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department said the men were meeting with an undercover officer to complete what they thought was a $51 million transaction for minerals development when they were arrested. Hogan appeared last Friday before a magistrate judge on a criminal complaint charging him with 23 counts, including racketeering, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, securities fraud, and sales of unregistered securities. At one time, Hogan was the Crow tribe's exclusive agent for securing funding for energy development, but the tribe terminated the agreement after his solicitations prompted complaints to federal officials. The Nez Perce tribe is pulling out of Idaho Governor Otter's collaborative bighorn sheep panel because legislation passed by Idaho lawmakers undermines the process, the tribe's chairman has said. Samuel Penny said the legislation ends any collaborative effort and the tribe will no longer take part in the Idaho Bighorn Domestic Sheep Working Group. The goal of the group, made up of state officials, sheep ranchers, sportsmen, and environmental organizations, had been to protect the sheep ranching industry while seeking a way for bighorn sheep to avoid contacting domestic sheep, which have been blamed for spreading deadly diseases to bighorns. But Republican State Senator Jeff Sidaway, a sheep rancher from Terryton, introduced a series of bills during the last legislative session aimed at protecting sheep producers. Otter signed into law a bill to require the Idaho Department of Fish and Game to work with producers to develop a plan to keep bighorns away from domestic sheep while preserving domestic sheep grazing on federal land. A high-profile initiative to spare a small group of Yellowstone bison from slaughter has been delayed until at least this fall after a Wyoming reservation reversed its plan to take the animals. Because about half of Yellowstone National Park's bison test positive for the livestock disease brucellosis, most of those that roam outside the park are captured and slaughtered. More than 1,600 were killed in the year 2008. In recent years, the government started sparing a small number of animals without the disease and putting them in a quarantine just outside the park. The plan is to use the bison to reestablish herds beyond Yellowstone Park. The first 48 bison were supposed to move in May. However, members of the Northern Arapaho recently told officials they don't want the animals on 30,000 acres of tribally owned ranch land on the Wind River Reservation that had been slated to receive the bison. They reportedly said it would put the animals too close to other cattle. Yellowstone National Park is home to the nation's most highly prized bison, about 3,000 genetically pure animals. Its 2 herds comprise one of the largest concentrations of bison in North America, but are still a meager remnant of the millions that once roamed the northern continent. A tribe with roots in New Jersey is pursuing an economic partnership with the Garden State's capital city. Kerry Holton, president of the Oklahoma-based Delaware Nation, also known as the Lenape, and Trenton Mayor Douglas Palmer signed a memorandum of understanding last Friday. Holton says the Delaware want to establish clean energy businesses and create green jobs in the city. He said the tribe is considering potential uses for surface parking lots the city has proposed for redevelopment and a 1.8-acre city tract along the Delaware River. Holton didn't specify how much the tribe planned to invest, but said it would be millions of dollars. Palmer said the agreement will help bring balance to the city's economy. The Tohono O'odham Nation will soon rebury the remains of nearly 200 of their ancestors dug up in the late 1970s and early 80s by teams of archaeologists working on what was then known as the Anamax-Rosemont site. They fear further disturbances of their ancestors' graves if permission is given to Rosemont Copper to dig an open pit copper mine in the foothills of the Santa Rita Mountains, an area rich with archaeological evidence of the Hohokam and other settlements. If that happens, the tribe will do what they already have done with thousands of cremated and skeletal remains dug up in the name of science or in advance of pipelines, freeways, and housing developments in the region. They will bless them and rebury them in ceremonies that Joe Kwan has a tough time calling traditional. There was no ceremony for reburial because we didn't do that, said Joquin, who has coordinated repatriation activities for the nation since the late 1980s. Joquin is busier than ever these days, working with colleague Peter Steer in the Cultural Affairs Office of the tribe to pore over inventories of human remains and associated funeral objects, sacred items or objects of cultural patrimony compiled by the nation's museum under the terms of a 1990 law called the Native American Grave and Repatriation and Protection Act, or NAGPRA. I'm still fighting the scientist, says Joquin, adding that he has never understood why archaeologists needed to study his ancestors' bones. If they want to know how people lived and what they ate, they should ask their descendants, he said. What are these people doing on a shelf? They should be down here in the dirt where we put them. The Arizona State Museum, which is repository for a lion's share of archaeological artifacts in the region, lists 5,930 sets of remains in its inventories, most of which 4,904 can be directly affiliated with an existing tribe. It has repatriated 693 sets of remains under NAGPRA. It also lists 6,962 funeral objects or items buried with the remains, including pots into which cremated remains had been placed. Nationally, museums and federal agencies have inventoried 150,795 individual remains, some entire skeletons and some as small as a bone fragment. The Wellbrighty Journey for Forgiveness will make visits in Anadarko, Oklahoma on June 4th and at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas on Friday, June 5th. Each day-long visit will offer presentation, ceremony, and circle-based sharing about boarding school experiences and healing from historic and intergenerational trauma. To participate in the event and walk at the Riverside Indian School in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and at the Sequoia Schools in Tahlequah, Oklahoma on June 4th, you can contact Sammy Rusko at 918-207-3896 or Dana Tiger at 918-822-7255. To participate in the event in the auditorium of Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas, you can contact Sharon Hallam at shallum, that's SHALLUM at haskell.edu, or call 785-749-8441. To read stories and see photos of the visits that have already taken place since May 16th, you want to visit www.whitebison.org and click on the Read News Stories and Updates from the Journey. To Robert Bear, there is more to Fossil Creek than its beauty. Bear was born and raised at Fossil Creek, and many recognize him as knowing Fossil Creek better than any other living human being. Bear said the water from Fossil Creek has healing powers. He says he has seen it heal people who believed in its powers. They were mostly members of the Yavapai tribe, but he also has seen Asians use Fossil Creek for its healing powers as well. Bear was among about 75 people who gathered recently on May 30th at the lodge at Cliff Castle Casino in Arizona to celebrate Congress's approval of Fossil Creek as a wild and scenic river. This designation assures Fossil Creek is receiving the funding it needs for protection and management. Those attending were also celebrating the passage of the Omnibus Public Land Management Act, which will protect many other areas throughout North America. And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank our underwriters for helping us with this broadcast, and you for joining with us again. Miigwech.